The cold wind howled across the barren plains like a hungry wolf as Theresa Blackburn watched her husband's silhouette disappear into the gathering blizzard, taking their only horse and leaving nothing but his final, cruel words hanging in the frigid air. "You ain't worth the trouble no more." December 1878 had been unforgiving to the Montana Territory, blanketing the rugged landscape with the worst winter anyone could remember. At 24, Theresa found herself abandoned beside the broken-down wagon that had carried their dreams westward from Illinois just 6 months earlier. Her thin coat offered little protection as snow began to accumulate on her shoulders, and the temperature continued to drop with the setting sun. Thomas Blackburn had never been a kind man, but she never imagined he would leave her to die. Their marriage had been one of convenience rather than love, her father's dry goods store for Thomas's promise of stability. The promise had lasted only until the gambling debts piled higher than their prospects. Theresa huddled against the wagon wheel, her fingers already numb as she tried to light the small lantern with trembling hands. The match sputtered and died in the wind. Another attempt, another failure. The third match caught just long enough for her to see the endless white stretching in every direction before it too surrendered to the cold. "God help me," she whispered, her breath crystallizing before her eyes. The sound came distantly at first, the rhythmic crunch of hoofbeats on snow, approaching steadily through the growing darkness. Theresa struggled to her feet, hope and fear warring within her chest as she squinted into the swirling white. A tall figure on horseback materialized like a ghost through the curtain of snow. "Hello," she called, her voice weak against the wind's roar. "Please help me." The rider drew closer, and Theresa could make out a broad-shouldered silhouette beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, snorted clouds of steam as it came to a halt beside her. "Madam," the man's deep voice carried concern as he swiftly dismounted. "What in God's name are you doing out here alone, my husband?" The words caught in her throat. How could she explain such cruelty to a stranger? The cowboy took one look at the abandoned wagon and her shivering form and seemed to understand immediately. Without hesitation, he removed his heavy duster coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sudden warmth made her gasp. "Name's Wade Garrison," he said, his hazel eyes searching her face with genuine concern. "Got a ranch about 3 miles east of here. We need to get you someplace warm before this cold takes you." "Theresa Blackburn," she managed through chattering teeth. "Thomas, my husband, he left me here. Took our horse and supplies." A shadow of anger crossed Wade's weathered face, but he said nothing as he helped her toward his horse. "Can't bring the wagon now. We'll come back for anything worth saving when this blizzard breaks." As he lifted her onto his saddle with surprising gentleness for such strong arms, Theresa felt tears freezing on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Wade mounted behind her, one arm securing her against his chest as he took the reins with his free hand. His body radiated a comforting heat that began to thaw the despair that had been settling into her bones. "You'll never be cold again," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear as he urged his horse forward into the storm. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Theresa didn't know if it was a promise or simply kind words to comfort a desperate woman. But as they rode through the blinding snow toward safety, she allowed herself to believe him, if only for this moment. The journey to Wade's ranch seemed endless, though it couldn't have been more than an hour. Theresa drifted between awareness and a dangerous drowsiness that Wade combated by speaking to her constantly, telling her about his land, his cattle, asking her questions that required responses to keep her mind alert. "Stay with me, Mrs. Blackburn," he urged whenever her answers became sluggish. Just a little farther now. When the outline of a substantial log home finally appeared through the snow, Theresa could have wept with relief. A barn stood nearby, and even through the storm, she could make out several outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and permanence. "Garrison Ranch," Wade announced as he guided his horse toward the barn. "Not much to look at right now, but it's home." Inside the barn, the sudden absence of wind felt like a blessing. Wade dismounted first, then carefully helped Theresa down, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. Need to take care of Thunder here before we head inside, he explained, efficiently removing the saddle from his stallion. Won't take but a minute. Theresa nodded, clutching his duster around her as she watched him work with practiced movements, speaking soothingly to the horse as he rubbed it down and provided fresh hay and water. There was a gentleness in his handling of the animal that touched something within her. Your husband, Wade said suddenly, his back to her as he finished with the horse. He do that often. Treat you poorly. The directness of the question startled her. We've had our difficulties, she answered carefully. But no, he's never abandoned me before. Wade turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim lantern light. Some men don't deserve the title, Mrs. Blackburn. Before she could respond, he guided her from the barn toward the house, one strong arm supporting her through the deep snow. As they approached, warm light spilled from the windows, and Theresa realized someone must be waiting inside. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, Wade explained, noticing her hesitation. Been with me since my parents passed, runs the place better than I ever could. The front door opened as they reached the porch, revealing a stout woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and a face that suggested she rarely suffered fools. Wade Garrison, what on earth? Her exclamation cut short when she noticed Theresa. Lord above, get her inside this instant. The poor thing's half frozen. What followed was a blur of activity as Mrs. Abernathy took command, ushering Theresa to a chair by the roaring fireplace, removing her wet outer garments and wrapping her in warm blankets while Wade explained the situation in low tones. Abandoned by her own husband, in this weather, Mrs. Abernathy's indignation was palpable as she pressed a cup of hot coffee into Theresa's hands. Well, you're safe now, child. Drink that down and I'll have a proper meal ready shortly. The warmth of the fire, the rich coffee, and the genuine concern surrounding her brought tears to Theresa's eyes. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had shown her such kindness. Thank you, she said, looking between Wade and his housekeeper. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Nonsense, Mrs. Abernathy declared, already bustling toward the kitchen. No decent person leaves another to die in a blizzard. When the older woman had gone, Wade took a seat across from Theresa, studying her with those perceptive hazel eyes. Where were you and your husband headed? He asked. California, Theresa replied, staring into her coffee cup. Thomas heard there was good land near a place called Wasco, said we'd start fresh there. Wade nodded. Long journey from here, especially in winter. Not impossible come spring, though. It doesn't matter now, she said softly. I have nothing left, no money, no transportation. You have time, Wade countered, and a place to stay until you figure things out. Theresa looked up at him in surprise. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition, he interrupted firmly. Ranch this size has plenty of room and Mrs. Abernathy would appreciate another woman around, stay through the winter at least. Before she could form a response, Mrs. Abernathy returned with a bowl of steaming stew and a plate of fresh bread. Eat, she instructed. We'll sort everything else after you've got something warm in your belly. That night, in a clean bedroom with a soft feather bed and thick quilts, Theresa lay awake listening to the howling wind outside. In the span of a day, her life had completely transformed. Her husband, the man who had vowed to protect her, had left her to die, while a stranger had risked his own safety to save her. She thought of Wade Garrison's promise, "You'll never be cold again." Words offered in a moment of kindness, perhaps, but they had awakened something within her, a fragile hope she scarcely dared to trust. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the solid walls of Garrison Ranch, Theresa Blackburn slept soundly for the first time in years. The storm lasted 3 days, blanketing the Montana landscape in several feet of snow and making travel nearly impossible. During this time, Theresa learned more about the man who had rescued her and the life he had built. Wade Garrison had inherited the ranch from his parents 7 years earlier, when he was just 23. Under his stewardship, the modest property had expanded to over 5,000 acres with a growing herd of cattle and a reputation for quality horses. He employed 4 ranch hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the barn, and Mrs. Abernathy managed the household with brisk efficiency. Never married, Mrs. Abernathy informed Theresa on the second day as they prepared dinner together, though not for lack of interested parties. Half the unmarried women in Fort Benton have set their caps for him. He seems kind, Theresa offered cautiously. The older woman snorted. Kind doesn't begin to cover it. Stubborn as a mule, works himself too hard, and has more pride than's good for him sometimes, but there's not a better man in the territory. She fixed Theresa with a pointed look. And don't you be getting any ideas about California, my girl, not until spring at the earliest. When the storm finally broke on the fourth day, Wade and two of his ranch hands rode out to recover Theresa's wagon. They returned by late afternoon, the wagon hitched behind Wade's horse. Wasn't much left, he reported, removing his snow-crusted hat as he entered the kitchen where Theresa waited anxiously. Looks like your husband took most of the supplies, found some clothing, a few books, and this. He placed a small wooden box on the table. Theresa recognized it immediately, her mother's jewelry box, containing the few precious heirlooms she had brought from Illinois. I thought it was gone forever, she whispered, running her fingers over the carved lid. Thank you. Wade shrugged off her gratitude. Weather's cleared enough to reach town tomorrow. Thought you might want to speak with Sheriff Miller about your husband. The thought of pursuing Thomas had never occurred to Theresa. What would be the point? He was likely halfway to California by now, or at least headed in that direction. I don't think there's any use in that, she said finally. Thomas is gone. Nothing the sheriff can do will change that. Wade studied her for a long moment. As you wish, Mrs. Blackburn, but abandoning someone in a deadly situation isn't just unkind, it's criminal. Please call me Theresa, she said, suddenly uncomfortable with the formal address that tied her to a man who had left her to die. And I appreciate your concern, but I'd rather look forward than back. Something in her tone must have convinced him, for he nodded and changed the subject. I'll be taking supplies to town tomorrow if there's anything you need. Mrs. Abernathy, who had been quietly preparing vegetables nearby, spoke up. Fabric for new dresses would be a start. Can't have the poor girl wearing the same two outfits for months. I couldn't possibly, Theresa began to protest. Consider it an advance, Wade interrupted. Mrs. Abernathy's been complaining about needing help with the household accounts and correspondence. You're educated, aren't you? Yes, but then it's settled, he said with finality. You'll help with the books and write the business letters I've been putting off. Fair exchange for room, board, and a few necessities. The arrangement was so neatly presented that Theresa found herself agreeing before she could think of a reasonable objection. The idea of earning her keep, rather than accepting charity, eased her pride considerably. The next morning, Wade departed for Fort Benton with a list of supplies and measurements Mrs. Abernathy had insisted on taking for Theresa's new clothing. Left to her own devices, Theresa spent the day exploring the ranch house and helping Mrs. Abernathy with the household chores. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with 4 bedrooms upstairs, a spacious kitchen and dining area, a comfortable sitting room with a well-stocked bookshelf, and a study where Wade apparently conducted the ranch business. Everything was clean and well-maintained, if somewhat sparse in decoration. His mother had a finer eye for those things, Mrs. Abernathy explained when Theresa commented on the plain walls. After she passed, Wade never much bothered with prettying the place up. Says as long as it's sturdy and warm, that's enough. In the study, Theresa discovered the disorganized account books and correspondence that Wade had mentioned. Ledgers were stacked haphazardly on the desk, and a pile of unopened mail sat in one corner. He's a fine rancher but has no head for paperwork, Mrs. Abernathy said, shaking her head at the mess. His father was the same way. His mother handled all of this before she died. Theresa found herself itching to bring order to the chaos. In her father's store, she had managed the accounts and correspondence from the age of 16, skills that Thomas had never valued or utilized. May I? She asked, gesturing to the desk. Be my guest, Mrs. Abernathy replied with evident relief. Might as well make yourself useful while you're here. By the time Wade returned late in the afternoon, Theresa had organized the ledgers chronologically, sorted the mail by importance, and begun to make sense of the ranch's financial situation. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear him enter the study until he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Abernathy said I'd find you in here," he said, looking surprised but not displeased at the transformation of his desk. "Seems you've been busy." Theresa stood quickly, suddenly self-conscious about taking such liberties. "I hope you don't mind. I thought I should understand the accounts before attempting to help with them." Wade approached the desk, examining her neat stacks and organized system. "Mind. This is the first time I've seen the top of this desk in months." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Find anything interesting in those numbers. Your cattle operation is quite profitable," Theresa observed, relaxing slightly. "But there are inconsistencies in the horse breeding accounts that I can't quite make sense of." Wade's eyebrows rose. "Inconsistencies? The expenses seem higher than they should be based on the number of horses you're maintaining. Either someone's made recording errors," or she stopped, suddenly aware that she might be overstepping. "Or someone's been helping themselves to supplies," Wade finished, frowning. "I've suspected as much for a while now, just haven't had the time to sort through it all." He gave her an appraising look. "Seems I made a good decision hiring you on, Theresa." The use of her given name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I'm happy to be of service," she replied, surprised to find she truly meant it. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed at Garrison Ranch. Mornings found Theresa helping Mrs. Abernathy with breakfast and household chores, while afternoons were devoted to organizing the ranch's business affairs. Wade was often out working with his men, but he made time each evening to review her progress and discuss any issues that required his attention. These evening meetings gradually extended beyond mere business matters. Wade would pour them each a small glass of whiskey to ward off the cold, he'd say with a wink, and they would talk about books they'd read, places they'd seen, and the dreams that had brought them west. Theresa learned that Wade had been educated back east before his father's health required his return to the ranch. He spoke with passion about his plans to expand the horse breeding program, focusing on strong, intelligent animals suited to the harsh Montana environment. "Most men out here just want the fastest horse they can find," he explained one evening as snow fell softly outside the study window. "But what good is speed if the animal can't survive a winter or find forage on its own when needed? I'm breeding for hardiness and sense as much as speed." In turn, Theresa shared stories of her childhood in Illinois, her father's store, and her love of numbers and organization. She spoke less of Thomas, though Wade never pressed her for details she wasn't ready to share. December gave way to January, and with the new year came bone-deep cold that kept everyone close to home. The ranch hands tended to essential duties, while Wade focused on repairs and improvements to the outbuildings that couldn't be done during the busier seasons. It was during one such project that Theresa first witnessed the respect Wade commanded from his men. She had brought coffee to the workshop where Wade and two hands were constructing new stall doors for the barn. As she approached, she overheard one of the men, a gruff cowboy named Peterson, speaking heatedly. "All I'm saying is McAllister's offering $3 more per head than the Fort Benton buyers. Seems foolish not to consider it." "McAllister's prices come with strings attached," Wade replied evenly, measuring a board. "He wants exclusive rights to our entire herd, and his contract terms would tie our hands for years to come. $3 more per head adds up mighty quick with a herd our size," Peterson persisted. Wade set down his tools and faced the man directly. "I didn't build this ranch by chasing quick profits at the expense of long-term stability. We maintain our independence, even if it means less money in the short term." "Yes, sir," Peterson conceded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. It was only when Theresa announced her presence with a soft cough that the men noticed her. Wade's serious expression immediately lightened. "Coffee, Mrs. Abernathy's timing is perfect as always," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Actually, she's busy with the laundry." "I thought you might appreciate something warm," Theresa explained, setting down the tray she carried. The two ranch hands nodded their thanks, but it was the way Wade's eyes lingered on her face that caused a flutter in Theresa's chest. There was appreciation there, certainly, but something more, a warmth that had nothing to do with the steaming coffee she offered. "Thoughtful of you," he said simply, but his smile conveyed more than his words. Later, as they walked back to the house together, Wade explained the situation with the cattle buyer. "McAllister's been trying to control the market in these parts for years. Offers tempting prices until he's squeezed out competition, then dictates his own terms to ranchers who have become dependent on him." "You're protecting your independence," Theresa observed, "even at a cost." Wade glanced at her with surprise. "Exactly. Freedom to make our own decisions is worth more than a few extra dollars per head." He hesitated before adding, "I imagine you understand something about the value of independence." The perceptive comment caught her off guard. She'd never framed her marriage to Thomas in those terms, but Wade was right. She had surrendered her independence, and at a far greater cost than she'd anticipated. "Yes," she said softly, "I believe I do." As January progressed, Theresa became increasingly integrated into the daily life of Garrison Ranch. The new dresses Wade had purchased in town fit her well after Mrs. Abernathy's expert alterations, and she found herself taking more care with her appearance than she had in years. Her honey blonde hair, once simply pulled back for practicality, she now arranged in more becoming styles, and the healthy food and regular routine had brought color back to her cheeks. The change didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as she entered the dining room for supper wearing one of her new dresses, a deep blue wool that complemented her eyes, Wade stood from his chair with an expression of stunned appreciation. "You look lovely," he said, then seemed embarrassed by his own directness. "That color suits you." Theresa felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Thank you. Mrs. Abernathy did wonders with the alterations." "It's not the dress that makes the difference," the housekeeper commented cryptically as she placed a roast on the table. "It's having a reason to care how you look again." The observation hung in the air between them, too close to a truth neither was ready to acknowledge. Wade cleared his throat and changed the subject to the weather forecast, but throughout dinner, Theresa caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. That night, alone in her room, Theresa confronted feelings she had been avoiding for weeks. She was attracted to Wade Garrison, not just grateful for his rescue or appreciative of his kindness, but genuinely drawn to the man himself. His intelligence, his principles, the gentle way he handled his horses, the respect with which he treated everyone from Mrs. Abernathy to the newest ranch hand all combined to create an admiration that was quickly deepening into something more. But she was still a married woman, technically if not in spirit. Thomas had abandoned her, but no divorce had been granted, no legal separation acknowledged, and Wade had never indicated he viewed her as anything more than someone in need of help and, more recently, a capable assistant. Theresa reminded herself that her stay at Garrison Ranch was temporary, a refuge during the winter months, until she could determine her next steps. Developing feelings for her benefactor would only complicate an already uncertain future. Yet as January gave way to February, these rational arguments did little to quell the flutter in her heart whenever Wade entered a room or the warmth that spread through her when their hands accidentally touched over account books or coffee cups. The situation came to a head one evening in mid-February when Wade returned from checking fence lines in the north pasture. A sudden storm had blown in while he was out, and by the time he reached the ranch, he was half frozen and covered in snow. Theresa was alone in the kitchen, Mrs. Abernathy having retired early with a headache when Wade stumbled through the door. "Wade," she exclaimed, rushing to help him remove his ice-crusted coat. "You're frozen through." Storm came on faster than expected, he managed through chattering teeth. Lost track of the trail for a while. His fingers were too numb to work the buttons of his coat, so Theresa did it for him, helping him shed the frozen outer garments. She guided him to a chair by the kitchen fire, then quickly poured a cup of hot coffee, adding a generous splash of whiskey from the bottle kept for medicinal purposes. "Drink this," she instructed, pressing the mug into his hands. When he struggled to hold it steady, she covered his hands with her own, helping him raise it to his lips. The intimate gesture wasn't lost on either of them. As Wade's eyes met hers over the rim of the mug, Something shifted between them, a barrier falling, a truth acknowledged. "Theresa," he said softly, her name almost a caress on his lips. She should have stepped back then, maintained the proper distance between them. Instead, she found herself kneeling beside his chair, still holding his hands around the warm mug. "You promised I would never be cold again," she whispered. "But what about you? Who keeps you warm, Wade?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning neither had dared express until now. For a long moment, Wade simply looked at her, conflict evident in his expression. "You're still married," he said finally, though he made no move to pull his hands away from hers. "To a man who left me to die," she replied, surprising herself with the bitterness in her voice. "A man I haven't loved in years, if I ever truly did." Wade set the mug aside and gently took her face between his warming hands. "I won't dishonor you, Theresa. You deserve better than that. And if I weren't married?" she asked, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "What then?" His thumbs traced gentle circles on her cheeks. "If you weren't married, I'd have courted you properly from the moment you were well enough. I'd have told you that you've brought light back into this house in a way I never thought possible." The raw honesty in his voice brought tears to Theresa's eyes. "And I would have welcomed your courtship," she admitted. "I've never met a man like you, Wade, never known what it could be like to be truly respected, truly seen." For a moment, it seemed he might kiss her, and Theresa found herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force stronger than propriety or circumstance. But at the last instant, Wade pulled back, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead instead. "We need to find a proper resolution to your marriage," he said, his voice husky with restrained emotion. "I won't build happiness on a foundation of deception, no matter how justified it might feel." Though part of her ached with disappointment, Theresa respected him all the more for his principles. "What do you suggest? First thing tomorrow, we ride to Fort Benton and speak with Judge Wilson about filing for divorce on grounds of desertion and cruelty," Wade said decisively. "It won't be immediate, these things take time, but it will be honest and legally binding." The practical solution was so like him, forthright and honorable, that Theresa couldn't help but smile through her tears. "And until then," Wade stood, gently pulling her to her feet with him. "Until then, I'll remember every day why I'm being patient." His eyes held a promise that warmed her more thoroughly than any fire. Some things are worth waiting for, Theresa Blackburn. The following morning brought clear skies and purpose. Wade and Theresa rode to Fort Benton together, the journey taking most of the day through snow-covered trails. The small frontier town bustled with activity despite the winter weather, as it served as a trading hub for the surrounding ranches and farms. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with shrewd eyes, listened carefully to Theresa's account of her abandonment. Though divorce was uncommon, especially for women seeking it, the judge seemed moved by the circumstances. "Abandonment in life-threatening conditions is indeed grounds for dissolution of marriage," he confirmed, making notes in a thick ledger. "However, we must make reasonable attempts to notify your husband of these proceedings. Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" "California," Theresa replied. "A town called Wasco, or at least that region. It's where we were headed before he left," the judge nodded. "I'll send notices to that area. In the meantime, I'll file these preliminary papers. The process typically takes several months, Mrs. Blackburn, especially when one party must be located." "And her legal status during this time?" Wade inquired, his voice carefully neutral despite the tension Theresa could sense in him. "She remains legally married until the divorce is granted," the judge stated flatly. Though separated, of course. As they left the courthouse, Theresa felt lighter despite the lengthy process ahead. For the first time since Thomas had abandoned her, she was taking action to determine her own future rather than simply reacting to circumstances. Wade seemed to sense her mood. "First step of a new beginning," he said as he helped her onto her horse, a gentle mare named Willow that he had insisted on gifting her for the journey. "A beginning I never expected," she admitted, adjusting her skirts on the side saddle. "When Thomas rode away that day, I thought my life was ending. I never imagined it might be the best thing that ever happened to me." Wade's smile warmed his entire face. Sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings. Their return journey to the ranch was filled with plans and possibilities. Though both carefully avoided any direct discussion of their feelings, the future they envisioned clearly included one another. Wade spoke of expanding the horse breeding program, of building a larger stable come spring, of possibly adding sheep to diversify the ranch's income. Theresa contributed her own ideas, improving the accounting system, establishing regular correspondence with buyers in larger markets, perhaps even starting a small orchard near the house for fresh fruit. "My mother always wanted fruit trees," Wade reminisced as they rode side by side through the snow-laden landscape. "Said nothing made a place feel more like home than picking your own apples in autumn." "Then we should plant them," Theresa said without thinking, then caught herself. "I mean, you should consider it. It would be a lovely tribute to her." Wade gave her a knowing look. "I like when you say we," he said quietly. "Sounds right, somehow." The admission sent warmth blooming through Theresa despite the cold February air. Spring came early to Montana that year, with March bringing unexpected thaws that turned snow to mud and swelled creeks beyond their banks. The change in seasons brought new energy to Garrison Ranch as winter projects gave way to spring preparations. Wade and his men worked from dawn to dusk mending fences, checking on pregnant cows, and preparing for the spring cattle drive. Theresa continued managing the household accounts, but also began spending more time outdoors, eager to escape the confinement of winter. One mild afternoon, she rode out with Wade to check on a mare that was due to foal. The rolling landscape had transformed from white to brown to hints of green almost overnight, with wildflowers beginning to dot the meadows near the creek. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," Theresa commented as they paused on a ridge overlooking the ranch. From this vantage point, she could see the full extent of Wade's property: the sturdy main house, the barns and outbuildings, pastures stretching toward distant mountains still capped with snow. "I have," Wade replied softly, his eyes on her rather than the view. Theresa felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. These moments had become more frequent as the weeks passed, meaningful glances, fingers brushing longer than necessary, conversations that hinted at deeper feelings neither could fully express while her marriage remained legally intact. Judge Wilson had sent word that notices had been published regarding the divorce proceedings, but there had been no response from Thomas. The judge estimated that if no objection was filed, the divorce could be finalized by summer's end. Any word from the judge? Wade asked, seeming to follow her thoughts. Theresa shook her head. "Nothing new, just waiting." Wade reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "I'm not a patient man by nature, but for you, I'd wait forever if needed." The simple declaration touched her deeply. "Thank you for respecting my situation, even when," she paused, unsure how to express the growing frustration they both felt at the constraints of propriety. "Even when every instinct tells me to court you properly, to tell you exactly how I feel." Wade's voice was husky with emotion. "It's not easy, Theresa, but you're worth doing things right." Before she could respond, a shout from the direction of the ranch caught their attention. One of the ranch hands was riding toward them at full gallop. "Mr. Garrison," the young cowboy called as he approached. "Come quick." "There's trouble at the house." Wade immediately tensed. "What kind of trouble, Billy?" "Stranger rode in about an hour ago," Billy explained breathlessly. "Said he's Mrs. Blackburn's husband. He's demanding to see her and causing a real commotion. Peterson's keeping him contained for now, but he's mighty worked up." Theresa felt the blood drain from her face. "Thomas," she whispered, her hand tightening involuntarily on the reins until her knuckles turned white. Wade's expression hardened. "Let's go," he said grimly, turning his horse toward the ranch. "Stay close to me, Theresa." The ride back seemed both endless and too quick. Theresa's mind raced with questions. Why had Thomas returned? What could he possibly want after abandoning her to die? And how would she face him now, with her heart irrevocably given to another man? As they approached the ranch yard, she could hear raised voices before she could make out the figures by the front porch. Mrs. Abernathy stood on the steps, arms crossed defiantly, while Peterson and another ranch hand flanked a man whose belligerent stance was all too familiar. Thomas Blackburn looked worse than when she'd last seen him, thinner, with several days' growth of beard and clothing that showed hard travel. He was gesturing angrily as he shouted at Mrs. Abernathy. "I know she's here. That judge in Fort Benton told me everything. She's my wife, and I've come to collect her." Wade dismounted in one fluid motion, then moved to help Theresa down from her horse. His touch was steady, reassuring. "You don't have to face him if you don't want to," he said quietly. "Say the word, and I'll send him packing." Theresa drew strength from Wade's solid presence beside her. "No, I need to end this properly." As they approached, Thomas caught sight of them, and his expression shifted from anger to a calculating smile that sent chills down Theresa's spine. She had forgotten how quickly he could change tactics when it suited him. "There she is, my devoted wife," Thomas called with false joviality. "Been looking all over for you, Theresa." Wade kept a protective stance slightly ahead of her as they reached the porch. "Mr. Blackburn, you've got some nerve showing your face here after what you did." Thomas's gaze flickered between them, assessment in his eyes. "This is between me and my wife, friend. A man has a right to speak to his own wife." "Not when he leaves her to die in a blizzard," Wade replied, his voice dangerously quiet. Thomas waved dismissively. "A misunderstanding. I went for help and got turned around in the storm. By the time I found my way back, she was gone." He focused on Theresa. "Been searching for you ever since, darling." The blatant lie made Theresa's blood boil. 4 months had passed since that day, months during which Thomas had made no attempt to find her until the divorce proceedings threatened him somehow. "That's not true," she said firmly, stepping forward. "You took our only horse, our supplies, and left me behind that wagon to freeze to death. You said, and I quote, 'You ain't worth the trouble no more.'" Thomas's friendly facade slipped momentarily. "Now, Theresa, you're remembering it all wrong. I was coming right back for you." "After 4 months," Wade interjected incredulously. "The only reason you're here now is because you received the divorce papers." At the mention of divorce, Thomas's expression darkened. "There'll be no divorce. A man has rights, and I won't have my wife running off with the first rancher who offers her shelter." The implication was clear, and Theresa saw Wade's hands clench into fists. She placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Why are you really here, Thomas?" she asked directly. "You didn't want me then. What's changed?" Thomas hesitated, and in that pause, Theresa saw the truth. She had been managing her father's store accounts long enough to recognize when someone was in financial trouble. "It's money, isn't it?" she pressed. "Whatever scheme took you to California failed, and now you need something." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "I heard about this place in town. Garrison Ranch, one of the biggest spreads in the territory. Figured my wife had landed on her feet." His gaze turned calculating again. "Thought maybe we could work something out, all friendly-like. A stake to get started again." The mercenary nature of his return disgusted Theresa. "You abandoned me to die. You forfeited any claim on me as a wife or otherwise." "The law says different," Thomas countered. "We're still married, and what's yours is mine, including whatever arrangement you've made here." He shot a meaningful glance at Wade. "Unless this gentleman has been improper with my wife, in which case I might have grounds for a different kind of settlement." The veiled threat hung in the air. Theresa felt sick at the implication Thomas was suggesting he would accuse her and Wade of impropriety for financial gain. Wade stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. "You'll get nothing from this ranch or from Theresa. The only thing you'll receive is the divorce she's rightfully pursuing." "And if I contest it?" Thomas challenged. "If I tell the judge my wife has been living unchaperoned with another man for months, might cast doubt on her character, don't you think?" "Mrs. Abernathy has been present as chaperone at all times," Wade countered smoothly. "And there are 4 ranch hands who can testify to the propriety of this household," Thomas sneered. "Ranch hands who depend on you for their livelihoods, not very convincing witnesses." "Enough." Theresa's quiet command drew everyone's attention. She had endured Thomas's manipulation for years, but never again. "You left me to die, Thomas. You abandoned our marriage long before I sought to legally end it. If you contest the divorce, I will ensure every person in Montana territory hears exactly what kind of man you are." Thomas seemed taken aback by her resolve. The timid wife he remembered had been replaced by a woman who knew her own mind and wouldn't be intimidated. "Now," she continued, "you have two choices. You can leave peacefully and allow the divorce to proceed, or you can make trouble and face the consequences. But either way, our marriage is over." For a long moment, Thomas studied her, perhaps weighing his options or simply absorbing the transformation in the woman he had discarded so callously. Finally, he gave a short, bitter laugh. "You've changed, Theresa." "Yes," she agreed simply. "I have." Thomas glanced between her and Wade, clearly reassessing the situation. "What if I told you I'd agree to the divorce for a price, a settlement to help me start fresh elsewhere?" Wade looked ready to refuse outright, but Theresa placed a hand on his arm. "How much?" she asked pragmatically. $500, Thomas replied promptly. "Small price for your freedom." 200, Theresa countered, ignoring Wade's surprised look. "And you signed the divorce papers today, with no further claims or contact." Thomas considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Throw in a horse and supplies for the journey and we have a deal." "Done," Theresa agreed before Wade could intervene. "You'll have your money and supplies after the papers are signed." Wade led Thomas into the house to draft the agreement while Theresa remained on the porch, suddenly exhausted by the confrontation. Mrs. Abernathy brought her a cup of tea, her expression a mixture of concern and approval. "You handled him well," the older woman observed. "Stood your ground but didn't let pride get in the way of a practical solution." $200 is a small price for peace of mind, Theresa replied, sipping the hot tea gratefully. "And for the chance to start anew without shadows from the past." Mrs. Abernathy patted her hand affectionately. "You belong here, girl. I've known it since that first morning when you insisted on helping with breakfast despite barely being recovered from near freezing." The simple acceptance warmed Theresa more than the tea. "Thank you for making me feel welcome from the beginning." Inside the study, Wade watched Thomas sign the papers with barely concealed contempt. The man had signed away his wife for a pittance, confirming every negative impression Wade had formed. "She deserved better than you," Wade said quietly as he counted out the money. Thomas pocketed the cash with a cynical smile. "She found it, apparently." "You're welcome to her, though I'd keep an eye on those account books if I were you. Girl's too clever by half." Wade's hand shot out, gripping Thomas's collar before he could react. "Speak of her with respect or not at all." Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant." "Just man-to-man advice." Wade released him with disgust. "Your horse and supplies will be ready within the hour. I suggest you be on your way before sundown." True to his word, Wade ensured that Thomas departed the ranch before evening, heading south with his money, a sturdy gelding, and enough supplies to reach the next territory. As they watched him ride away, Wade put an arm around Theresa's shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked, studying her face for signs of distress. To her own surprise, Theresa felt only relief. "Yes," she answered honestly. "It feels like the final page of a book I never want to read again." Wade nodded, understanding. "Judge Wilson will still need to process the signed papers, but with Thomas's agreement, it should be straightforward now." Theresa turned to face him fully. "Thank you for everything today, for standing beside me, for respecting my decision to pay him off, for protecting me without taking over." "You didn't need much protecting," Wade observed with admiration. "You were magnificent." As the spring sun began to set behind the distant mountains, casting golden light across the ranch, Theresa realized she was truly home not because of the buildings or the land, but because of the man beside her and the life they could now begin to build together. The weeks following Thomas's departure brought renewed purpose to Theresa's life at Garrison Ranch. While they waited for the divorce to be officially processed, she threw herself into spring preparations alongside Wade and the ranch hands. April brought the first calves and foals, keeping everyone busy day and night. Theresa discovered a natural affinity for the horses, particularly the new foals that required special attention. Wade found her in the foaling barn one morning at dawn, gently coaxing a reluctant newborn to nurse from its anxious mother. "You have a way with them," he commented, leaning against the stall door as he watched her patient efforts, Theresa glanced up with a smile. They just need someone to be calm and steady. Animals sense when you're nervous or impatient. People too, Wade observed thoughtfully. You've brought that same steadiness to the whole ranch. Even Peterson's less ornery these days. His compliment warmed her. I've found purpose here. It's a good feeling after drifting for so long. Wade entered the stall, kneeling beside her in the fresh straw. I received a letter from Judge Wilson yesterday, he said, watching her carefully. The divorce has been granted. It will be official next week when the papers are filed. Theresa's hands stilled on the foal's silky neck. Next week, she repeated softly. After months of waiting, the final barrier between them would be removed. Wade took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I've been patient, Theresa. Waited to court you properly, to tell you what's in my heart. His voice deepened with emotion. But once those papers are filed, I don't want to wait anymore. The directness of his declaration made her heart race. What are you saying, Wade? I'm saying that I love you, he replied simply. Have loved you since that night by the fire when you organized my chaotic books with the same care you've since brought to every aspect of ranch life. I love your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. He squeezed her hand gently. And I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife not right away, but when you're ready. The foal between them chose that moment to finally latch onto its mother, beginning to nurse vigorously. Theresa laughed softly at the timing, tears of happiness pricking at her eyes. I love you too, she answered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And yes, I would be honored to become your wife. Wade's face lit with joy as he leaned forward, mindful of the nursing foal, to place a gentle kiss on her lips there first. The simple contact held more meaning and tenderness than Theresa had ever experienced, a promise of the love they would share. When he pulled back, Wade's eyes were bright with emotion. I've imagined that moment for months, he admitted, worth the wait. Theresa asked, her lips still tingling from his kiss. Absolutely, he assured her. Though I plan to make up for lost time once we're properly engaged. They named the full promise a testament to new beginnings and the future they would build together. The following week, after confirmation arrived that the divorce was officially recorded, Wade formally proposed during a picnic beside the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the ranch. He presented her with a delicate gold ring set with a small diamond and flanking sapphires. It was my mother's, he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. She always said it should go to the woman who brought light back to Garrison Ranch. That's you, Theresa. News of their engagement spread quickly through the territory. Most reactions were positive. The ranch hands tipped their hats to Theresa with new respect. Neighbors offered congratulations, and Mrs. Abernathy practically glowed with satisfaction at what she considered her successful matchmaking. Knew it from the moment he carried you in from that blizzard, she declared as she helped Theresa plan for a June wedding. Never seen the man look at anyone the way he looked at you, even half frozen as you were. Not all responses were as supportive. Some gossips in Fort Benton whispered about the hasty nature of the engagement following Theresa's divorce, while others questioned her motives in marrying one of the territory's most eligible ranchers. Wade dismissed these rumors with characteristic directness when he overheard them in the mercantile. Mrs. Blackburn saved my life as surely as I saved hers, he informed the startled gossips. This ranch was profitable but empty before she came. Anyone who questions her character or intentions answers to me. His public defense only deepened Theresa's love for him. You didn't need to challenge the entire town on my behalf, she said later, though she was secretly touched by his protective instinct. I won't have anyone diminishing what we've found together, Wade replied firmly. What matters is that we know the truth of it. As spring blossomed into early summer, preparations for both the wedding and the annual cattle drive kept the ranch bustling with activity. Wade would be leaving with the herd for 3 weeks in late May, driving the cattle to the railhead at Helena where better prices could be secured. I hate leaving so close to the wedding, he told Theresa as they finalized plans for his departure. But Peterson can't manage the buyers alone, and the timing can't be helped. The ranch comes first, Theresa assured him. I'll have everything ready for the wedding when you return. Mrs. Abernathy is determined to transform the ranch into a floral paradise. Wade brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering on her cheek. The only thing that matters is that you'll be waiting when I get back. Always, she promised, sealing the vow with a kiss that conveyed everything words could not. The night before Wade was to depart with the herd, a tremendous thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Lightning split the sky as rain pounded the ranch buildings, turning the yard to mud and swelling the creek to dangerous levels. Shortly after midnight, Peterson burst into the main house, dripping water and urgency. "Creek's flooding. It's heading for the lower pasture where we gathered the herd." Wade was on his feet instantly, pulling on boots and reaching for his slicker. "Wake the men. We need to move those cattle to higher ground immediately." "I'm coming too," Theresa declared, already reaching for her own coat. Wade paused. "It's dangerous out there, Theresa. You need every hand," she countered, her tone brooking no argument. "I can ride as well as any of your men." After a moment's hesitation, Wade nodded. "Stay close to me or Peterson. If I tell you to head back, you do it without question." "Agreed," she promised, though they both knew her stubborn nature might override such promises if others were in danger. The scene at the lower pasture was chaos. The normally placid creek had become a raging torrent that had already breached its banks, flooding the low-lying areas where nearly 300 cattle were gathered for the next day's drive. Lightning continued to flash overhead, spooking the already nervous animals. Wade quickly organized the men, sending riders to the north and south sides of the herd to begin moving them toward the eastern ridge where the ground rose more steeply away from the floodwaters. "Theresa, stay with Billy on the south flank," Wade instructed. "Keep the strays from breaking toward the creek." For the next several hours, they worked tirelessly in the driving rain. Theresa's muscles ached from the constant tension of controlling her horse while pushing reluctant cattle toward safety. Her clothing was soaked through despite the slicker, and mud covered her from boots to hat. Yet there was exhilaration in the work too, the coordinated effort of humans and horses against the elements. The satisfaction when a stubborn steer finally turned away from danger, the growing sense that they might save the herd despite nature's fury. Dawn was breaking when disaster struck. Theresa and Billy were herding the last few strays toward the main group when a massive tree, undermined by the floodwaters, crashed down along the creek bank. The noise sent the nearby cattle into a panic, head them off. Billy shouted as several steers broke away, charging blindly toward the swollen creek. Theresa spurred her horse forward, racing to cut off the panicked animals. She managed to turn two back toward safety, but a third plunged down the bank toward the raging water. Without hesitation, Theresa followed, knowing the valuable animal would be lost without intervention. She maneuvered her horse alongside the steer just as it reached the water's edge, slapping its flank with her rope to drive it back up the bank. The steer turned, but as it scrambled upward, the saturated earth beneath Theresa's horse gave way. She felt the sickening sensation of falling as her mount lost its footing on the crumbling bank. "Theresa," Wade's voice cut through the sound of rushing water and rain. He had seen her predicament from across the field and was galloping toward her. Theresa kicked free of the stirrups as her horse struggled to regain its balance. The animal managed to lunge upward to solid ground, but Theresa slipped from the saddle, tumbling toward the creek. She struck the cold water with shocking force, immediately swept downstream by the powerful current. Fighting panic, she remembered Wade's instructions from their creek rides. "If you ever fall in during high water, don't fight the current directly. Angle toward shore gradually." Gasping for breath, she managed to orient herself and began the exhausting work of swimming diagonally across the current. The weight of her wet clothing dragged at her, and debris in the water struck painfully against her legs and arms. Through the gray curtain of rain, she caught glimpses of riders paralleling her progress along the bank. Wade at the lead, his face a mask of determination as he sought a place to intercept her path. A fallen tree extended partly into the creek ahead, creating a dangerous strainer where water flowed through, but solid objects, including people, could be trapped. Theresa saw it coming and fought harder against the current, trying to avoid the deadly obstacle. She was losing strength quickly when Wade's voice reached her again. "There, grab the rope." A lasso splashed into the water just ahead of her. With her last reserves of energy, Theresa lunged for it, her numb fingers closing around the rough hemp. Almost immediately, she felt the pull as Wade and Peterson hauled on the line, drawing her toward the shore and away from the fallen tree. The next moments were a blur of hands reaching for her, pulling her from the frigid water onto the muddy bank. Through water-blurred eyes, she saw Wade's face above her, his expression shifting from fear to profound relief as he gathered her against his chest. "Don't you ever do that to me again," he said fiercely, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I'd lost you." Theresa coughed, expelling creek water from her lungs. "The steer, to hell with the steer," Wade interrupted. "Nothing on this ranch is worth your life." Despite her exhaustion and the lingering danger of the flood, Theresa felt a wave of love for this man who valued her above all else. "I'm sorry I scared you," she managed through chattering teeth. Wade removed his own slicker and wrapped it around her, then lifted her onto his horse. "Let's get you home and warmed up. The herd is safe on higher ground now." By the time they reached the ranch house, the rain had slackened to a steady drizzle. Mrs. Abernathy took one look at Theresa's soaked, shivering form and went into immediate action, ordering hot water for a bath and warm blankets. After ensuring Theresa was in capable hands, Wade returned to help the men secure the cattle and assess damage to the ranch. When he returned hours later, mud-caked and exhausted, he found Theresa in the sitting room by the fire, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot tea. "You should be in bed," he chided gently, though relief at seeing her recovering was evident in his expression. "I wanted to wait for you," she replied. "Is everything secure?" Wade nodded as he sank into the chair opposite her. "Lost only 3 head in the flood." "Considering how bad it could have been, we were lucky." His eyes held hers intently. "Especially lucky to not lose something far more precious." "I'm tougher than I look," Theresa assured him with a small smile, "though I admit creek swimming isn't something I care to try again anytime soon." Wade leaned forward, taking her hands in his. "The cattle drive can wait a few days. I'm not leaving until I'm certain you've fully recovered." "I'll be fine by tomorrow," she insisted. "The drive can't be delayed. You've commitments to Byers and Helena." Their gentle argument continued until Mrs. Abernathy intervened with her practical wisdom. "The girl needs rest, Wade Garrison, not your fussing. Go clean yourself up and get some sleep. You both look half dead, and there's decisions enough for morning." In the end, the cattle drive departed 3 days later than planned. The delay allowed time for the floodwaters to recede and for Theresa to recover from her ordeal. It also gave Wade and Theresa precious additional days together before their 3-week separation. The morning of his departure dawned clear and mild. Theresa walked with Wade to the corral where the men were making final preparations for the long journey. 3 weeks will pass quickly," she assured him, though her heart already ached at the thought of his absence. "Mrs. Abernathy and I will have everything ready for the wedding when you return." Wade pulled her close, heedless of the ranch hands pretending not to notice nearby. "Just be here waiting," he said softly. "That's all that matters to me." Their goodbye kiss held promises of the future. They would build together a future that had seemed impossible when Theresa had huddled, abandoned and freezing, beside that broken-down wagon months earlier. As she watched Wade ride out at the head of his men, cattle streaming behind them across the green valley, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Thomas's cruelty had led her to Wade's kindness. Near death had opened the door to a life more vibrant than she had ever imagined. "You'll never be cold again," Wade had promised on that snowy night of her rescue. Standing in the warm spring sunshine, surrounded by the ranch that had become her home, Theresa knew he had kept that promise in ways neither of them could have foreseen. The 3 weeks of Wade's absence passed both slowly and quickly for Theresa. She filled her days with wedding preparations and ranch responsibilities, determined that Wade would return to find everything in perfect order. With Mrs. Abernathy's guidance, she transformed the spacious front yard into a wedding venue, arranging for benches to be constructed and wildflowers to be gathered. They planned a simple but elegant celebration, with a feast to follow for neighbors, ranch hands, and the few friends Wade had made during his years in the territory. Theresa also spent time creating her wedding dress, adapting a pattern from a ladies' magazine Mrs. Abernathy had saved. Using fine cream-colored fabric Wade had purchased during their last trip to Fort Benton, she worked during quiet evenings, stitching by lamplight and dreaming of the moment Wade would see her in the finished gown. Despite these pleasant distractions, she found herself watching the Eastern Trail each afternoon, counting the days until Wade's expected return. The cattle drive had gone well according to the telegram that arrived midway through the second week, but such journeys were unpredictable, with delays common due to weather or other circumstances. On the morning of the 21st day, Theresa was in the garden harvesting early vegetables when Billy rode in at full gallop. "They're coming," the young ranch hand called excitedly. "Just spotted them crossing Miller's Ridge. Should be here within the hour." Theresa's heart leapt. Abandoning her basket of peas, she hurried inside to change from her work dress into something more presentable. Mrs. Abernathy helped her arrange her hair, a knowing smile on the older woman's face. "He won't care if you're in sackcloth with mud on your face, Mrs. Abernathy commented as she pinned the final strand of honey blonde hair into place. "That man's only got eyes for you, no matter what you're wearing." "Nevertheless," Theresa replied with a smile, smoothing the skirt of her blue dress, the same one Wade had complimented months earlier. "I want to look my best for him." They heard the cattle before seeing them, the lowing of tired animals and the shouts of drovers guiding them into the holding pens. Theresa waited on the front porch, her heart pounding with anticipation as the dust cloud approached. Finally, she spotted him tall in the saddle at the head of his men, hat pulled low against the sun. Even at a distance, she could see the exhaustion in his posture, the result of 3 weeks of constant vigilance and minimal sleep. Yet the moment Wade caught sight of her on the porch, he seemed to transform. Straightening in the saddle, he urged his horse ahead of the others, covering the remaining distance at a gallop that sent dust billowing behind him. He dismounted in one fluid motion before his horse had fully stopped, crossing the yard in long strides. Theresa barely had time to descend the porch steps before she was swept into his arms, lifted clear off the ground as Wade held her tightly against him. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Thought of you every mile of the way home." Theresa wrapped her arms around his neck, heedless of the trail dust that covered him. "Welcome home," she whispered, tears of joy pricking at her eyes. When he finally set her down, Wade framed her face between his hands, his gaze drinking in her features as though memorizing them anew. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered. And you need a bath," she teased gently, though her eyes shone with love. "You smell like 3 weeks on the trail," Wade laughed, the sound warming her heart. Direct as always, he glanced toward the approaching drovers and cattle. "Let me get the men organized and the herd settled, then I'm all yours." "Forever?" Theresa asked, suddenly serious despite her smile. Wade's expression softened as he bent to place a gentle kiss on her lips. "Forever," he confirmed, "starting right now." The wedding took place 3 days later on a perfect June morning. Neighbors and friends from throughout the territory gathered in the ranch yard, which had been transformed by Theresa and Mrs. Abernathy's efforts. Wildflowers adorned every available surface, and white ribbons fluttered from the porch rails in the gentle breeze. Judge Wilson, who had granted Theresa's divorce, agreed to perform the ceremony. As he stood with Wade beneath an arch of twisted willow branches, the older man seemed genuinely pleased to be completing this chapter of their story. When Theresa emerged from the house on Peterson's arm, the ranch foreman having proudly agreed to give her away, a hush fell over the gathered guests. Her cream-colored dress was simply cut but elegantly detailed with pearl buttons and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She had woven wildflowers into her upswept hair, and her mother's cameo, one of the few treasures recovered from the abandoned wagon, hung at her throat. But it was her radiant expression that truly captured the attention of everyone present, especially the groom. Wade's face reflected such naked adoration that several of the women present dabbed at their eyes before the ceremony even began. "Dearly beloved," Judge Wilson began as Theresa took her place beside Wade, their hands joined between them. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of two lives that found each other through adversity and forged a bond stronger than the elements that first brought them together." The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with Wade and Theresa exchanging vows they had written themselves. "Theresa," Wade said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes, "I found you on the coldest night of the year, but you brought warmth back into my life that had nothing to do with fire or shelter. I promise to cherish the strength and grace that brought you through that night and every challenge since. I promise to be your partner in all things, to respect your mind and heart as much as I adore your spirit. My home has been a house. With you, it becomes a haven." Theresa's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Wade, you saved my life, but more importantly, you showed me what life could be when shared with someone who values and respects me. I promise to stand beside you through whatever storms we face, to be your comfort in sorrow and your companion in joy. You promised I would never be cold again, and in your love, I have found a warmth that sustains me beyond any hearth fire." When Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Wade's kiss was both tender and possessive, a claiming and a giving that perfectly represented the balance of their relationship. The cheers and applause of their guests seemed distant compared to the profound connection in that moment. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables laden with food and drink filled the yard, and one of the ranch hands who played fiddle provided music for dancing. Lanterns were lit as dusk fell, casting a golden glow over the festivities. As Wade led Theresa in a dance beneath the stars, she leaned her head against his chest, savoring the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. "Happy, Mrs. Garrison?" he asked softly, his arms tightening around her. "Completely," she assured him, tilting her face up to his. "Though I'm still getting used to the name," Wade smiled down at her. "It suits you, almost as if you were meant to have it all along." Later, when the last guests had departed and the ranch was quiet under the moonlight, Wade carried Theresa across the threshold of their home, truly theirs now in every sense. In their bedroom, with only candlelight illuminating their first night as husband and wife, Theresa discovered the final dimension of Wade's promise. His touch was gentle yet passionate, reverent yet claiming, as they consummated their marriage with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and a completion she had never imagined possible. "I love you," she whispered as they lay entwined afterward, her head resting on his chest. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone." Wade's fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder as he pressed a kiss to her forehead. "And I love you, my unexpected blessing, my heart's completion." He smiled in the darkness. "Not bad for a cowboy who just happened to be riding by a broken-down wagon in a blizzard. Providence, not chance," Theresa murmured sleepily, feeling more content than she had ever been. "We were meant to find each other." As she drifted towards sleep in her husband's arms, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect happiness. Thomas's cruelty had ultimately led her to Wade's kindness. Abandonment had opened the path to belonging. Near death had given her a second chance at life, a life richer and more meaningful than she could have imagined as she huddled, freezing and alone, beside that wagon months ago. "You'll never be cold again," Wade had promised on that snowy night. In the warmth of his embrace, Theresa knew with absolute certainty that he would keep that promise for all the days of their lives together. 5 years later, December 1883, snow fell softly outside the windows of Garrison Ranch, blanketing the expanded property in pristine white. Inside, warmth and laughter filled the spacious main house, which had been enlarged and improved over the years as the ranch prospered. Theresa stood by the large stone fireplace, watching with a smile as Wade sat cross-legged on the floor, helping their 3-year-old son, James, construct an elaborate fort from wooden blocks. Nearby, their 5-month-old daughter, Emma, slept peacefully in her cradle, one tiny fist curled beside her cheek. Higher, Papa, James demanded, his hazel eyes so like his father's bright with excitement. Make it reach the sky. Buildings that reach the sky need strong foundations, Wade explained patiently, demonstrating how to place the blocks for maximum stability. Just like ranches and families. The wisdom in the simple statement made Theresa's heart swell with love for this man who approached fatherhood with the same thoughtful dedication he brought to everything important in his life. 5 years of marriage had only deepened their connection. Working side by side, they had expanded Garrison Ranch into one of the most successful operations in the territory. Wade's horse breeding program had gained national recognition, while Theresa's careful management of the business affairs had allowed them to weather the economic fluctuations that had driven many smaller ranchers to sell out. The small apple orchard they had planted that first spring now produced fruit abundantly, and the ranch house had been expanded to include a proper office for Theresa, additional bedrooms for their growing family, and the large gathering room where they now celebrated Christmas. Mrs. Abernathy still ruled the kitchen, though she now had help from a young woman from town during busy seasons. The kindly housekeeper had become Grandma Abby to young James, a role she embraced with surprising tenderness for someone who had never had children of her own. Wade looked up, catching Theresa watching them. The smile he gave her still made her heart skip, even after 5 years of marriage. "Come join us," he invited, patting the floor beside him. "James is building a replica of Garrison Ranch. It's the biggest ranch in all the world." James declared proudly as Theresa gathered her skirts and joined them on the floor. "Is that so?" she asked, accepting a block from her son's small hand. "And who's going to run this enormous ranch?" "Me and Papa," James answered confidently. "And Emma too when she's bigger." Wade raised an eyebrow at this progressive view. "Your sister's welcome to run whatever part of the ranch interests her," he agreed, winking at Theresa over their son's head. "Just like your mama runs our accounts better than any man could." The easy equality between them had been the foundation of their marriage from the beginning, a partnership in the truest sense. Wade valued Theresa's business acumen as much as her skills as a wife and mother, while she respected his dedication to the land and livestock that sustained them. A knock at the door interrupted their play. Peterson, now the ranch's foreman and trusted friend, entered with a blast of cold air. "Sorry to disturb you, boss," he said, removing his snow-covered hat, "but there's a wagon come in. Family with young'uns, looking mighty cold and worn out. Said they were trying to reach Caldwell's place but got turned around in the snow." Wade was on his feet immediately. "Bring them in, of course. Theresa, can we? I'll have Mrs. Abernathy prepare hot food and coffee," she said, already rising, "and we'll make up beds in the east guest rooms." "How many children?" "3 that I saw," Peterson replied. "Oldest not more than 10, I'd guess." Wade nodded gratefully at his wife's immediate understanding. "Tell them they're welcome to stay until the weather clears." As Peterson departed to bring in the stranded travelers, Theresa and Wade shared a look of perfect understanding. Both remembered all too clearly another snowy night when kindness had changed the course of 2 lives forever. Within minutes, the family was ushered into the warm house, a weary-looking man, his exhausted wife, and 3 children with red cheeks and frightened eyes. The smallest, a girl of about 4, clung to her mother's skirts, eyeing the strangers warily. "Robert Daniels," the man introduced himself, extending a cold, reddened hand to Wade. "Can't thank you enough for taking us in. Storm came on faster than we expected." "Wade Garrison," Wade replied, shaking the offered hand firmly. "This is my wife, Theresa. You and your family are welcome here for as long as you need." Mrs. Abernathy appeared with mugs of hot coffee for the adults and warm milk for the children, while Theresa helped the mother introduced as Sarah removed the children's wet outer garments. "We were heading to my brother's homestead near Fort Benton," Sarah explained as her children cautiously accepted the offered refreshments. "Robert lost his job at the sawmill in Helena, and John, my brother, said he could use help on his place." "Tough time of year to travel with little ones," Theresa observed gently, noticing the worn quality of their clothing and the thin faces of the children. Sarah nodded, fatigue evident in every line of her body. Didn't have much choice. Landlord wanted the rent and we didn't have it. As the strangers warmed themselves by the fire, James overcame his initial shyness and offered to show the oldest Daniel's boy his block fort. Soon, the children were playing together while the adults talked quietly. Watching the scene, Theresa was struck by how easily fate could have placed her in Sarah Daniels' position, dependent on the kindness of strangers, uncertain of the future, trying to maintain dignity and hope for her children's sake. She caught Wade watching her, a similar thought evident in his expression. Without words, they communicated their shared decision. After ensuring the Daniels family was fed and settled in comfortable guest rooms, Wade and Theresa retreated to their own bedroom, speaking in low voices to avoid waking baby Emma in her cradle nearby. "They remind me of so many families we've seen pass through," Wade observed as he built up the fire in their bedroom hearth. "Chasing dreams or just running from hardship." Theresa nodded, brushing her hair at the vanity. "When he mentioned losing his job at the sawmill, I thought of Miller saying just last week that he needs skilled help at the lumber operation." Wade smiled at her reflection in the mirror. "I was thinking the same thing." "And the foreman's cabin by the east pasture is sitting empty since Taylor moved into town. It would need some fixing up," Theresa mused, setting down her brush, "but it would give them shelter through the winter at least. Are we agreed then?" Wade asked, coming to stand behind her, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Theresa covered his hand with her own. "We've been blessed, Wade. Sharing those blessings seems only right." He bent to press a kiss to the top of her head. "I'll speak with Robert in the morning, see if he's interested in work and temporary housing until they decide their next steps." Theresa turned on her stool to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved features that had only grown more dear to her over the years. "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have gone if you hadn't ridden by that wagon 5 years ago?" Wade caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Sometimes, but mostly I think about how right it feels that I did. As if all the choices and chances of our lives were leading us to that moment. You promised I'd never be cold again," Theresa reminded him softly. "Now we can make that same promise to another family in need." Wade drew her to her feet and into his arms. "The best promises are the ones we keep renewing, day after day, year after year." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held the comfort of familiarity and the eternal spark of deepening love, Theresa gave silent thanks for the storm that had once seemed like the end of her life, but had actually been just the beginning. Outside, snow continued to fall on Garrison Ranch, but within its walls, warmth and love created a haven against any cold the world might bring, a promise fulfilled and renewed with each passing season, each shared joy, each challenge faced together. And in the quiet of their room, with their children sleeping peacefully nearby and strangers sheltered under their roof, Wade and Theresa Garrison continued writing the story that had begun on that frigid Montana night when a cowboy had found a woman abandoned in the cold and promised her a lifetime of warmth.